Hello, this is Deborah Anderson, the Black Woman Animator, coming back to you with another video. And this video is with my newest friend and veteran animator, Dan Haskett. Thanks for coming, Dan.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
So my first question is, what was your childhood journey with art and animation?
Oh, that's a very easy one to answer because I started drawing when I was 3 years old. And I knew very, very early on that I wanted to be a cartoonist. So animation was something that was a part of my life from the very, very beginning. And coming from New York, as I did, in the New York market, you had all of the animation on TV that had ever been done up to that point. So I could see the whole history of the medium at a glance. And by the time I was about 10 or 11, I knew I wanted to try it. I wanted to get into it. Either that or comic strips or something. But I pretty much knew, I think by the time I was I'd say about 12, that I wanted to be an animator.
So I know you mentioned before about all the different high schools that were available to kids in New York City at the time. Can you go into a little bit about that?
Yeah, New York had several public schools that were essentially trade schools. They had names like Bronx High School of Science and aviation and printing and so on. And my high school was the High School of Art and Design, which is happily still there. At least I think it's still there. And Art and Design specialized in commercial art. So among other things, they had classes in fashion illustration and costume design and architecture, advertising, you name it, sculpture, so forth. And I was a cartooning and animation major. And that was kind of interesting because, for one thing, I had a teacher who was actually from advertising, and he wasn't an animator at all. And I don't think he wasn't really a cartoonist either. He was an illustrator and a calligrapher, among other things. But he was stuck with this room full of class clowns. And I have to say, I think he did pretty well, all things considered, in keeping the lid on with this bunch of students that were kind of flying off the handle a lot of the time. But what was good about it for me was that the fact that he wasn't a cartoonist was that he opened up our heads to different things. It wasn't just a straight line through with cartooning, and that was very, very helpful.
So growing up, were your parents supportive of your impending future career?
Happily, yes. And I'm very grateful to them for that because they had every reason not to be. Both of them were artists. My father was a musician, and my mother and her mother both drew. But none of them were able to make a career out of their art. And so, they could have just said, no, don't do it, do something more practical, or, it'll break your heart or whatever, but they never did that. And thank goodness, thank goodness.
So another grand question, how was it growing up in Harlem, and how did that influence your love of art?
Oh my, well, growing up in New York City in general, Okay, let me start with Harlem. Harlem was wonderful for me because of music. You know, you could hear all kinds of music pouring out the windows, you know, from people's radios and phonographs and all that, which was terrific. And like the rest of Manhattan, you could see all kinds of little dramas and comedies around you constantly. I always say that as an animator, growing up in New York was the right thing for me because you're constantly surrounded by people and how people behave. And you can store that away in your mind, or you can walk around and sketch it with your sketchbook, and, you know, whichever way you want to preserve it. There's all this stuff going on that you can use later on when you're doing your animated acting. It was really a godsend, I'd say, for me, because I tend to store things away in my memory. Anyhow, I mean, an old colleague of mine once thought that I had a photographic memory. And I hadn't thought about that way. I thought, no, I don't know about that, but maybe he was right. I don't know. Because there was just so much going on that I absorbed. And it was very helpful, very, very helpful in everything I've done since. So, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
So,
okay.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And so as you were leaving New York City, is it true that you had the choice of moving to Los Angeles or to London with a certain someone, and what made you choose Los Angeles?
Okay, well, the certain someone was Richard Williams. And fortunately for me and a lot of other people, he decided to take on a job that was most unusual, in that it was a feature-length animated cartoon that was going to be done primarily in New York City. And this was right on the heels of Ralph Bakshi doing the same thing with Fritz the Cat. So it was most unusual. And it was, the whole thing was being run by a couple of Broadway show producers who had never done a film in their lives. And so, of course, the first film that they do is going to be a cartoon, which has all of its own headaches and ups and downs and everything else, and peculiarities that they had no idea about. But fortunately for all of us, Richard Williams was called in to direct. And at the time, he was trying to learn or relearn what the old Hollywood animators, the Golden Agers, so-called, had done. And so he managed to get a hold of as many of them as he could to work on this picture with him. At the time, he was trying to get his London studio up to speed in that kind of animating, because up to that point, they had done mostly, very graphic stuff, graphic design type of stuff, but not the really performance-oriented animation that the Hollywood people had been doing. So we had a staff of veterans from Disney, Warner, MGM, UPA, Paramount, Fleischer, and Terry Tunes. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. It was, I think, the best experience that I've had on a film so far. And for everybody concerned, it was a marvelous learning experience, because we had a staff with an age range from about 18 to 86. And the 86-year-old was Grim Natwick, the guy who designed Betty Boop. So you had quite a range of ability. You had people who had worked on Snow White and Pinocchio and Tom and Jerry and Bugs Bunny and Mr. Magoo and everything else. So it was a wonderful, wonderful combination, especially for a lot of hungry kids who wanted to learn the business. And as a result of that, Dick gave me a bit of a choice, because I think he had spoken to the people at Disney. I think he had spoken to Frank Thomas and Eric Larson, I think. He never outright said anything about it that I can recall. But he gave me a chance to either go with him to London or to go to Disney, to try out for it. And I was under the impression that I was just trying out like anybody else. But looking back on it, I think he had given them a heads up about me, which, very thankful about. And I remember going out to Los Angeles with a group of people from the movie, which was, I don't think I mentioned the name of it. It was Raggedy Ann and Andy. And Eric Goldberg and I had gone out to Los Angeles with some other folks from the show to try our luck. And I remember sitting on a bus bench in LA with Eric and saying, I don't know really what I want to do. I'm not sure which way to go. And he said, you know what you want to do. Go ahead. And he was right. I think everybody at that time wanted to find out what Disney was like, except maybe for him at that time, because he went off with Dick to London. So he went to London and I went to California.
That's funny. So what do you love about hand-drawn animation?
I love the warmth of it. I love the fact that you can do virtually anything that you can imagine with it. You're not as tied down as you might be with other forms. Anything you can draw, you can animate. And so you're not limited to what a puppet, whether it's a real three-dimensional puppet or a CG puppet. You're not limited to what a rig is capable of. I remember talking to an animation historian when The Incredibles was in production. And he was telling me that they had to create new software to try to replicate what you can do with drawings. And so that made me think, well, why are you why are you bothering? Why are you bothering? Just draw it, But I thought it was a kind of a fascinating idea that they went to all this trouble to do what they did, so that they could maintain the 3D look. And it worked. What can I say? It worked for them. But for me personally, I love to draw. So that's it. That's it for me.
And you still do the drawing to this day, right?
Yeah.
On paper?
Right. I think I may be one of the last people in the United States who was doing it. But yes, I'm still doing it. And I have no intention of giving it up because I love it. I love it. And I know I can do things with it that I couldn't do if I was working with a rig.
Right.
So there you go.
What are the different skills that you have to bring as a storyboard artist versus an animator? What are the skills that you have to bring when you're a storyboard artist, and then as an animator, what are the different skills that you have to bring to the table?
The main difference, I think, with storyboarding would be composition, staging, because both of them are storytelling. But with storyboarding, of course, you're telling a story with all of the elements, not so much with performance. You indicate performance in a storyboard, but performance is the animator's property, you know. With storyboard, it's mainly staging and timing. Today, storyboard artists are actually timing the pictures often, which I don't know. I feel like they should really be working with the director on that. But you know, I guess it depends on how a studio is set up. But I think today's storyboard artists are doing way too much. Telling a story is enough. That's quite enough of a thing to do. It's quite enough of a complex activity. That you really don't need to be doing the editing and the timing and so forth as well. It's enough that you just tell the story well and directly and simply and properly. That's enough to do. That's a big deal. And I'm very sorry to see so many storyboard artists have had so many other things piled on their shoulders, because it's quite unfair. But anyway, for me, there's the difference, the key difference. Storyboarding is telling the story with composition and staging, indication of acting, while animation is acting, it's performance. So
how can people, when you're animating, what are you thinking about in the process of, and as compared to what maybe a beginner or a novice would be thinking about?
I'm getting the impression that because of the changes over the last 25, 30 years, I don't know if a lot of animators today are really thinking in terms of performance as much as we did, because when my generation was coming up, we were trying to save character animation, personality animation, because that had already gone, that looked like that was going extinct. You know, when Hanna-Barbera was the prime example. They were the kings of animation in the 60s and 70s, and they were not doing full animation anymore. They were doing TV that had a whole bunch of different requirements, and they no longer had the time or the budgets to do full animation. So we were trying to rescue that because we loved it so much. And that's another reason why working on Raggedy Ann was such an opportunity, because we were trying to compete with Disney at that point. Today, I'm just getting the impression that the TV way of doing things has taken over to a point where it's difficult for somebody, at least in the United States, for somebody who actually wants to make a career as an animator, especially as a traditional animator, doing hand-drawn, to be able to make a living. And so people are concentrating more on just doing whatever is necessary to be able to make a living, rather than learning and developing and refining an art form. And that's very sad to me. I hope that more young people really start getting into the idea that you can do so much more with this than you're doing. And it's so much more, I mean, from where I sit, it's so much more fun. It's just so much more fun doing it that way, you know. What I love about, you know, answering your former question again, what I love so much about hand-drawn work is that you can make an audience actually believe that this stack of drawings is a living thing.
Right.
And that's amazing to me, you know, and why would you throw that away? You know, that's way too much fun to throw away.
What is your commentary on, you know, newer animators maybe not using reference as much as they should?
Oh, not using reference. I think they're missing out on a lot. Now, when you say reference, are you talking about rotoscoping or?
No, just like not relying on whatever's in their brain and actually trying to look at things or research what they need to animate.
Well, ultimately, you're going to have to rely on what's in your brain anyway. You know, often you have to research things. I remember as a character designer, one of the biggest research jobs I ever had was for a movie that never happened, where all the lead characters were fish, and I was not used to drawing fish, so I had to do a lot of research, and actually that was a lot of fun because I found, you know, the enormous variation of faces and forms in fish that really did make some great characters. So in looking at that, I was like, my God, you know, like Mother Nature has given me a ton of wonderful information here, you know, to play with. So in looking what was already there, and then you know, adapting it and caricaturing it, was quite an experience. So when it comes to you know, I'd say, you know, tackling any new show, any new process or activity, research is a wonderful thing. It can help you terrifically, but you're not just copying, you know. You're not just looking at the research and essentially tracing it. You have to bring something to it. You have to bring your knowledge of human beings to whatever kind of characters you're working with, you know, whether they are human or space aliens or animals or whatever. You have to bring your knowledge and your humanity to what you're doing so that other people will be able to relate to it and respond to it.
I saw some recent commentary on Twitter about character designs, and the example that they used was, you know, if there was like a pigeon or a bird or a toucan, they would draw the male just this one way, and then the female character would have these faux boobs with high heels, and it was like, what? And then some other commentary was like, as compared to nature, the guy of the species is usually the prettier, because they're trying to attract the female. So they were commenting on their aggravation with, you know, character designers putting boobs and heels on female animals. Or
oh man, I gotta find that, you know, when this is over.
I have to send it to you.
Give me the information because I gotta look that one up. That's funny.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. We have to. we have to try not to be lazy in what we do. One of the Disney Nine Old Men, that elite group of animators from the Golden Age, Milt Kahl, was known for saying, I think quite a few times, he would remark on how lazy some of his co-workers were. And being that he was considered one of the demigods of the animators.
Yeah, his signature was definitely anti-lazy.
Yeah. I mean, but he had an excellent point, because for one thing, you don't grow as an artist if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And neither do you grow as a performer or as a communicator. When I was little, there was a comic strip in the newspapers called Winnie Winkle. And I think Winnie Winkle was a young career girl of the 1920s and 30s when the strip started out. And the guy who was drawing the strip at that time, in the 60s, was cracking me up, because he only knew one way to draw a woman. And so every woman, except for maybe the older women, all looked exactly alike except for their hairdo. And this was very, very common with a lot of cartoonists and animators, that they had one way of doing something that would get them through the job. And so often they saw no need for doing anything else. And so this is why you have the toucan with boobs and long eyelashes, or high heels or whatever, because it would have been a lot more fun, thinking about it. It would have been a lot more fun to do the male toucan from nature. And they're like, okay, well, what would that look like? What does a more flamboyant male character look like? And I'm glad you mentioned it, because we don't do that too often. So it's something new to think about, and that's what keeps you going.
Yeah, and we've talked about before about how sometimes I've seen maybe on Instagram or somewhere where a guy or male artists will continually do these muscular buff characters, and my theory is because they don't know how to draw women, like the softness and the whatever of women, and so they just keep drawing buff dudes all the time.
Yeah, I had a job doing storyboard one time on the Spectacular Spider-Man. And the reason that I got that job was that the board artists that two of the directors had only wanted to draw fights. Okay? So they were stuck now. They had these teenage characters who are having these teenage problems, with dating and with trying to hold down a job and trying to get through school and all this stuff. But they didn't have any board artists who wanted to draw that stuff. They didn't want to do the performance stuff. They just wanted to do, the knockdown, drag out fights. So it was helpful for me that I loved acting, because I was able to keep working. So from a purely practical standpoint, it's a very good idea to learn how to do the other stuff. But yeah, you're right. A lot of guys just like drawing, the buff characters. They like drawing the muscular superheroes and all that, and they're not really interested in drawing a lot of other things. And I remember that even as a kid. I remember that generation, which I guess they call them now, I think, the Silver Agers. You know, there's always an age for something. There's a Bronze Age and a Silver Age and all. But what used to crack me up in looking at comics as a kid was how many Silver Agers had a whole lot of trouble drawing animals and children and elderly people. And it was, oh man, you would get some very interesting things, especially if they, oh my God, especially if they had to draw babies. Oh my God, you would get some fascinating things. You would get some fascinating looking creatures.
Things.
You know, because all they wanted to do, you know, they knew how to draw the tough guys, you know, the rock jaw guys. And anything else was a little out of their kin, you know, and it was obvious.
Very obvious.
Oh man! And so you had a that grew up that had grown up on that stuff and didn't see any reason to be any different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you just started seeing would run across their path or whatever, man, you know, you see some stuff. It's like, what's that? I saw something just the other day. I saw an old magazine cartoon of something that was supposed to be a pig. But yeah, whoever drew it, I think only knew how to draw a dog. And so he had this, you know, combination that looked like something from the island of Dr. Moreau, you know, it was, you know, it was a pog or
What are those compliments that you give, you know, when you're looking at a baby and you don't want to comment on how it looks, like, oh, look at that baby looking like itself.
Oh, well, yeah, that sure is a baby there. Yeah, you got there, yeah. But yeah, very long story short, yeah. The more you can pick up, the more learning that you know, the more you can take in. Please take it in. Go to the zoo and learn how to draw animals. You know, go to the ballet and learn how to draw ballerinas. You know, and learn how to draw other kinds of men as well. You know, learn how to draw old men, learn how to draw fat men, learn how to draw all shapes and sizes. You know,
right.
Earlier
when we were talking about New York, I forgot to bring up. There was a guy, T. Collins, that you knew, who had a studio in New York. I wanted to ask you about the impact on seeing a Black man own a studio when you were young, coming up in the industry.
It was terrific because I don't know if at that time I wasn't aware of anybody else who owned a studio. As it turned out, I think that Leo Sullivan and Floyd Norman also had a studio in Hollywood, but then that's just 2 studios in the whole country, you know.
Right.
as far as I knew. But it was just wonderful to meet T and to work with him and to hear his stories being in the business, because it was very unusual. It's still unusual, unfortunately. But it made for a unique experience because this was somebody who understood what I was about, you know, and I understood what he was about. And
the shorthand, no code switching.
Right, exactly. And it was at a time when change was trying to happen, like today. it was, the civil rights movement was still going strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a wonderful opportunity and experience to work with somebody who got it, who understood. And T had done, I think he had been in the business since the 50s.
Mm.
And he had done, doing commercials, because the commercials were the main thing in New York. I don't recall his background too much. I know that he had done work for studios. I think it was Elektra or Academy, who were, they were big studios in the 50s and 60s. And so to find out that there was a Black designer at these studios was an amazing thing. George Olden, who it's debatable now what he did, but he was a right-hand. George Olden was a Black graphic designer who was a right-hand man to a fellow named William Golden, who put CBS TV graphics on the map. Okay. CBS was known for its great graphics in the 1950s and 60s. And George Olden was right there. And he is credited with designing the CBS Eye. So, and I found that out, I was like, oh my God. I mean, it's still, people are still debating, who gets the credit for that design, but it's still with us to this day. And it was just amazing and incredible that I think any Black person was able to get a foot, that much of a foot in the door at that time.
So you mentioned the 9 Men earlier, and you had an opportunity to work with some of them. You didn't, and I know you started your career before, working on, I think, Brim Coffee and a lot of, and Raggedy Ann and Andy and all that stuff. But how has the animation landscape changed since you started? Because there were more trainees back then, and that was more common when you started. I'm not sure if that's very common now, but how is the animation landscape, how things work, whether it's through like the workers or the administration, how have things changed throughout the decades?
Okay, things have changed considerably. As far as Disney itself is concerned, at the time I first started there, they were in trouble actually, because it wasn't sure that the Disney brass, the executives, were not sure if they were going to keep doing animation, which sounds incredible now, but that was the situation. And so in doing The Fox and the Hound, they had to get a whole bunch of neophytes up to speed very, very quickly, because the bulk of their staff had left long ago for television, and in all departments. And so they were working with basically a skeleton crew, and the skeleton crew was starting to diminish as well. Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston were going to be leaving. They were going to be retiring and writing their first book. Milt Kahl had retired already. John Lounsbury had passed on, and others had, Mark Davis and Les Clark had gone on to Disneyland and to live action projects. So Eric Larson was left with having to take all these green kids and try to whip them into shape in record time so that they could finish this movie. And that was a heck of a situation. And since then, training new animators morphed away from learning on the job to learning in college. And when Chenard became CalArts, it became the training ground for new Disney people, okay? But since then, that's become the norm, that the business is depending on the colleges to train, to do their training for them. And this has its ups and downs, because the advantage to learning on the job, obviously, is that you learn much faster. You learn more, and you learn more faster. And you also have the advantage of hearing all of the war stories of the veterans that can help you so much, that those are invaluable to a kid, because that's the way you learn about how to survive in the business. You can't learn that in college unless you have many people coming in as guests telling you these things. And often in a school atmosphere, you're removed from the day-to-day of a business. So you still have the opportunity, if you want to not pay attention to what a guest speaker is telling you. You still have you can still sit back and say, oh, well, that's not going to happen to me, whereas if you were on the job, you'd have to really think seriously about what you're doing. So yeah, that's one of the major changes in the business. And also over the last about 50 years now, the outsourcing of the actual animation has really played havoc with what's left, because Disney Walt Disney was quite right, I think, with the idea that everybody should have at least a working knowledge of animating in order to work in the field, because what you learn translates into every other discipline on a movie. If your working knowledge of animation, character design character design took a really big hit when it wasn't being done by people who knew anything about animating. So did storyboarding. So does layout. Everything took a hit when the animation went overseas, and hasn't completely recovered. Character design, and I can speak on that because that's what I've been doing for the last 30-odd years. It took a major hit. People just didn't understand what made a design truly workable, especially on a TV schedule, which is very, very fast, right? And I remember when I was working on the first version of Batman, the animated series, that the design that they came up with was, it looked great as stills, but I couldn't help thinking like an animator and saying, I can see that these folks are really going to have trouble moving this stuff because it was very boxy. And it's of course, it's easier to turn a ball than a box. So when the film started to come back, I thought, well, I could see it. You could see the people struggling with turning those things, and it was something to see. I mean, eventually, over time, they were able to do it. But had they chosen a different design route to begin with, it could have been done much sooner. It could have been done much easier, and you could have had something that in my opinion, would have been just as attractive and just as appealing. So, yeah, we've had a lot of changes. I mean, and the technological changes also. They still have the potential to be marvelous. You know, they still have the potential to bring actual animating back to this country or any other country. You know, it's I don't think it's any longer a thing of having to ship stuff out to get it done cheaper.
Yeah, you told a story about a secret story about some people who had to animate and not send it and not outsource it, and it was quicker.
Yeah. A major studio here in the States was doing a TV series that the usual way of outsourcing the animation, but for some reason they had to do an episode in-house, and they did it. And not only did they do it, they did it on time, and they did it under budget. And the executives told them to hush that up. So I don't know what's going on, but obviously you can do it here now again. So I don't know what's going on, and I'm not going to presume anything.
Right.
All I know is from that story, you're able to do it if you want to do it. So there you go.
So if everyone watching, if everyone watching hasn't Googled or IMDb Dan by now, I'm going to go through a lot of the stuff that you've worked on, but then I'm going to deep dive into some particulars. But you worked on Sesame Street, and as a storyboard artist and as an animator, you worked on various projects such as Garfield and Friends, The Smurfs, Rocko's Modern Life, Johnny Bravo. You did one episode of The Proud Family, Class of 3000, Raggedy Ann and Andy, as you've already mentioned, Alvin and the Chipmunks. You designed Ariel for Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. You did Belle, Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. I like that movie. Animaniacs. I like all this stuff, actually. The Page Master, Toy Story, The Prince of Egypt, Happily Ever After, Fairy Tales for Every Child, Johnny Bravo, and you worked on the Jetsons. And the question I have for you with the Jetsons is, you know, I don't like remakes, but what is your theory on why nobody has mentioned the Jetsons in the past decades of remakes? My theory is that they're not creative enough to think into the future of what we're supposed to have. I mean, sometimes they could use the same things because we don't have flying cars, but I feel like maybe the writers aren't creative enough to think of what the future should look like.
That could be a big problem. Oh, I have to say one thing. I did not work on Rocko's Modern Life. That's the only thing. That's the only thing on the list I didn't work on.
All right.
But with the Jetsons, it could be that people are having trouble trying to figure out how to, you know, project things into the future from here on in, because so many things that the Jetsons predicted, you know, we have in one form or another. And when I was working on, I worked very briefly on the movie. And one of the producers on that was a friend of mine who was telling me that he felt that what made the TV show popular were the gadgets, you know, the futuristic gadgets. And I was thinking, yeah, that's true to a point, but it was also the effect that they had on the characters. Like if you were going to reboot the Jetsons now, you would have to, you know, not only project yourself into the future and find out what people would be, you know, imagine what people would be doing 100 years or whatever hence.
Yeah.
But what effect that would have on people.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about the original Jetsons is that the characters were based on the comic strip Blondie. You know, just like the Flintstones have been based on the Honeymooners TV show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, Blondie didn't have as much power as the Honeymooners had, and so the characters were a little weaker, you know, with the Jetsons. Now I think you'd have to give them a good boost as well. I mean, you could probably keep the same basic personalities, but you have to, I think, maybe do something with them to make them more interesting over a long haul. You know, there was an episode in the first reboot of the Jetsons that was a lot of fun. Looking back on it, George runs across a guy who has a portable time machine. And somehow George gets a hold of it and starts playing with it. And in doing so, he almost loses Jane because he changes the past. And he begins losing Jane to another guy. And I thought that is a wonderful idea. You know, it's the kind it showed what was possible with a reboot of the show, and actually working the characters into the fabulous technology.
Yeah, the gadgets as well as the human aspect. I feel like in 2020 and in the 21st century, there's such a concentration on technology. And, you know, updates to technology, but there's no updates to humans and us getting better as people.
Well, like, I don't know, maybe that doesn't make for good drama. I don't know. but no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Well, here's an opportunity. Here is the perfect time to do exactly that. Here's a time to use animation to help people to see things differently, you know, and help people to think differently, to finally at least do some damage to the last 400 or 500 years of what people have gone through in this country. We have an opportunity to do something about that now in how we educate children, especially, but also in how we get adults to see how they can learn new behaviors, new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing, and new ways of imagining, for that matter. This is an excellent time. This is a great opportunity to use animation. And I mean, animation has always been great as an educational tool. And this is a wonderful time and a very apt time to use something that has the entertainment quality of animation and has the ability to bypass the intellect the way animation does, so that you can reach people at a gut level.
Yeah. Oh, and through my research, I found that we actually worked on the same movie, ScoobyDoo, Legend of the Phantasaur. You were a character designer, and I did the background. When I lived in Korea, I did the backgrounds. I don't know, for that one, I might have done like a dinosaur under a sheet that's on my demo reel from back then. But and we might have worked on other things. It's just after I left Korea, I kind of stopped tracking what Scooby-Doo movies I worked on. And I saw you had a lot on your IMDb. But I told you before about how I vibed with Floyd Norman on our disdain for Scooby-Doo, because there was a background that I was doing for one episode, and it was like a rock formation in a quarry or something like that, and they tried it in 2D and then they brought it to 3D, and I just couldn't figure out what my director wanted, and so he was kind of pissing me off. And so like when they would upset me, you know, the building was formed in a square where the windows were on the outside and you could walk around the outside, and all the offices were in the inside. So I would just go to another floor and walk around and then come back to my desk. But with Scooby-Doo, he like upset me so much that I went and walked outside around a Korean block, which is similar to a New York City block, right, to cool down, because I'm just like, I really don't know what you want from me, and I can't speak Korean to try to figure this out. Like, we had done very well with me not being fluent with Korean up until then, but I'm just like, I have no clue what you want. So they had to give it back to 2D, but I was like, and I don't remember what Floyd Norman's hang up was, but when I saw him at Essence Festival and after his documentary, I had him draw Scooby-Doo, and I still have the picture somewhere, but I was like, kindred spirits. We don't like Scooby-Doo. At least working on it.
Oh my, I don't think anybody who worked on the creation of that series had any idea it would still be here 50 years later.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've worked on it for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. I do not understand its popularity. I probably never will. But the one good thing I will say about it, aside from that it's kept me eating recently,
yeah,
is that every so often, as a character designer, I would get something to do that was unusual, and that kept my brain active. Mm-hmm. And so that, I would say, you know, that was at least one thing that I could enjoy in working on the show. But yeah, it's so ironic that I ended up on it, because, like I say, oh golly, I was a teenager when that show came out. In fact, it came out the year I started in the business, and
when you were 17.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, that's it for Hanna-Barbera. And so here we are, 50 years down the road.
I will admit that I made a Facebook post recently, and I put Rut-Row as my caption.
Yeah, that's become very popular now.
Yeah.
But I have to say, maybe another good thing about it, perhaps, is that it gives you some idea what an amazing effect animation has on people. Because, like I said, I cannot understand. It escapes me completely what people see in that show. But doggone it, you know, doggone it. Listen to me. But here we are. You know, they love that dog.
I saw a hilarious article yesterday, and it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I saw a hilarious article yesterday that said, you don't really like Disney. You just haven't been happy since you were 11 years old.
Well, that's evil.
And so Disney takes you back to a safe place, I guess.
Oh, that is beautifully evil. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's quite true. I mean, I think for a great many people, that was their childhood, you know, and that's all there is to it. And it's kind of too bad. I mean, I was born 3 years before they opened Disneyland. And so I was not part of that generation. You know, I was in New York. I never was able, my parents could not afford to travel cross country.
Mm-hmm.
So I never got to be part of that group that was, Disneyland crazy. And I'm very glad. I am very, very glad. I started when I first came out to Hollywood, I started meeting people who went there regularly when they were kids.
Mm-hmm.
And in listening to them, I realized I was listening to people's imaginations shrinking.
Mm.
Uh,
And what do you mean by that?
because Disney's power in the children's market is so strong that people have forgotten other things. When I was giving I was doing a class at NYU, and I came across a student who had just read The Little Mermaid, who had just read Hans Christian Andersen's original Little Mermaid for the first time, and all she had known was the movie. And she was horrified. People are not reading the original versions of fairy tales. To my knowledge, most people only know the Disney version. There's a lot of children's literature that has been forgotten. There's an outlook on storytelling that's been forgotten. There are several outlooks on storytelling that are being forgotten. Because movies in general, not just Disney, are have been heading in a small handful of directions. And I'm hoping that now with streaming, I'm hoping that there'll be a little bit. I'm hoping there'll be a lot more of some kind of expansion in storytelling. Because people have become used to one thing or a very small group of things, and it's really done a number on little kids. I think, I can't say for sure. I'm not a parent, but it's what I've noticed is that when you deviate from that kind of thing, and getting back to Disney, what I have to say with the cartoons, they did make efforts to go in new directions. But I think what happened was the parents or the fan base or whatever didn't want it. They did try things like Hunchback and Atlantis and so forth, but they didn't go over with, to my understanding, they didn't go over with the fan base. So, here we are.
So, I sent you an image of this artist that did a 2D character design or transformation or whatever of John Boyega from Star Wars and many other films. And I won't put it up because I don't want to call anybody out, but a lot of times when I see character designs for Black characters, I can usually tell when a white artist did it versus a Black artist. And what is it about some white artists that when they draw Black characters, they don't capture it correctly, and they take our Africanness or our Blackness out of it sometimes?
They're not really seeing us. They're not really looking at us.
That could be a double meaning.
Well, I once gave a talk at an animators conference where this came up. I was showing the work some of the work that I had done with Black characters and with Asian characters, and the impression that I got was that people just were not, I'll say, white people were not really used to actually seeing what we actually look like. Okay. It's a thing where, again, when it comes to cartoonists, they don't study, they don't research, they don't really look. They do what's convenient, what's comfortable, whatever they already have in their minds. And where Black people, where people of color are concerned, unfortunately, that can be stereotypes. And again, it's just a thing of really, really observing and drawing what is actually there, rather than just what you perceive. But that's basically it. I mean, it's something that is, it's been rampant. It's been rampant in cartooning forever. Like I said before, you'll do things that'll get you through the job. And also in some cases, it's a thing where people will draw what makes them comfortable, not what is actually there. Because sometimes what's there makes them uncomfortable. They don't want to deal with it.
And if people want to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
I'm on Facebook, and they can reach me through on email through dakahask@gmail.com, and that's DAKAHASK @gmail.com.
So again, I would like to thank my new friend for coming to bless us on the Black Woman Animator YouTube channel. And for all of those out there, I would like you to like so I know it's real, comment and tell me how you feel, subscribe to Seal the Deal, and sign up for post notifications to show your zeal. And we'll see you in the next video. Peace.
Great. Take care.